Hello, everybody. I see that you got some coffee and cake. I didn't get that, unfortunately. That's not nice. And I'm standing here between you and lunchtime, so great to see that you got something to eat, at least during this session. Yeah. It is? Okay. I hope there is something left for me after this. You're not nice. I'm going to talk some about analyzing log files in Teams from the Teams client. I'm Linus Kansby. I'm from Sweden. The most common question I get from this is it Linus, say whatever you want. If you want it, I will respond anyway. I'm an MVP focusing on Microsoft Teams. I have background in working with Skype for Business, Link, Office Communicator, and even Live Communication Server when it was existing. So I'm focusing a lot of working with voice and meetings. Lately it's been a lot of with Teams telephony. I think it's related to Microsoft released this year was the year of voice, so we've got a lot to do. So we're going to talk some about this. Sorry we could not connect you. Issues you get when you trying to do calls in Teams. Mostly, as a consultant, I work a lot with customers, helping them do like workshops, how to get to started with Teams Voice. Most of my customers are global. They always have outsourcing partners that do all the hands-on work. And when there is an issue, I see that many people tend to go directly to Microsoft support. They don't check the log files. We have a lot of good information in Teams Admin Center where we can see what is the issue. You, as an end user, you might not have access to Teams Admin Center. As a consultant not doing the hands-on work, you might not have access to Teams Admin Center. So I'm going to show you some examples that you can actually find some information in the regular Teams log files. So don't panic, there is an answer. What I will show, I will do some, my plan was to do some live demonstration, but then I realized on a conference, not good, so I recorded some examples. And you might not find this. You will see that these are examples, so you might not have the exactly same problem that I show, but I will show something so you get an idea of what kind of information you can find in the desktop logs. Now, to start with, we have a couple of different log files to look into. We have the debug log files, we have the media log files, and desktop logs, and all these are available in the Mac and the Windows client, the Linux client, and the web. You get them with these commands. It's easy to remember. You can also use, I will show later how you do it just with a couple of mouse clicks. But when talking to an end user, it's much easier to say, okay, press these 4 buttons and you will download the log files instead of go to the small Teams icon down by the clock and then right-click and so on. So I think that if I want log files from the end user, I think it's easier to just say these commands. But, let's start with the debug logs. These are the files that we will look into later. Here you get some information about login issues, all the information about the Teams client when it connects to Teams. We also see information about all the calls and conversations here. We can see when a call started, why it was ended, and so on. These are the log files that we will look into the most. Then we have the media log files. It records information about the quality of the call and so on, diagnostic data about video and audio and desktop sharing. This is unfortunately not the files we can look into. You need some special tools, so it's only for Microsoft support. So this is not interesting for us. The media logs if you've been into settings, you maybe seen this, enable logging. So this turn on the media logging. It's actually turned on automatic for some, depending on what kind of computer you have. So it's automatic for some of them, for some CPUs. But all computers, you can enable it on all computers, but it's only for support. So you maybe notice that sometimes Teams can be a bit slow, like in meetings. I'm not sure if anybody of you noticed that, but I'm not sure how much CPU this takes, so I tend to recommend not turning it on. The less Teams have to do in the background, it's probably better for the end user experience. Then we have something called desktop logs. It's the same. It's a text file. You can read it, but it's usually no funny information there. It's mostly been used for Microsoft support, so they can see information about what kind of plugins be loaded and versions and so on. So the first case here, I was working with a customer. She had a problem that now and then her calls and meetings were disconnected. She said, okay, I haven't disconnected call, I'm sure of that, but sometimes it disconnects. She'd been talking to their support and they said, no, it's no problem. It's probably something on your home network or something else. We can't help you. So I said, okay, send a log file to me and we can look into it. So here's what we do. We open from the computer. See if it plays here. So here you can collect support log files. What it will do is it download all the log files. It will turn up in the download folder. This is the same as using the keyboard command I showed before. You will get a folder with all the log files, and what we are interested in here is the things that's in the web log files, or the web folder. So when opening this, this is regular text files, but I recommend that you download and install Visual Studio Code. It's a freeware. With this tool, you can do more. It's better than Notepad, since you can run it in dark mode, and you can do some search here as well. So when it's open up here, you see the log file. It's a lot of text, but you have a search pane here. So we know that it was something that made us to leave the call. So I search for leave call context, and I get these are all the different calls she'd been in. And we see the last one. It was triggered by the HID interface, the human interface device, and that is the headset. So here I could see that, okay, I know that you didn't disconnect the call by like clicking the end button or leave call button. We know it's your headset that did this. What you did next was start begging for the IT support to get a new headset. She replaced it, and then we later realized that she had this headset with control buttons in the middle of the wire. So every time she moved that, it was like a glitch in it, so it disconnected the call. And she tried a lot of times to get help from support. They didn't find this. We find it in the log files just by looking what ended the call. So if you have a user complaining that calls are disconnected, you can find it in the log files. Just for summary, use Visual Studio Code. It's freeware, you can download it, and it's much easier to search. Open in the editor there, it's filtering out all the steps, and in this case we search for this leave call context that will show, or it will show what triggered leave from the call. In the next example, we have normalization issues. So in Teams, you do this normalization, so you can, when a user dials a number, you can change it to translate it to something else. In this case, it was a customer. They were moving from traditional PBX, a Cisco PBX, and they had some short-digit calling. So they dialed external partners with a 4-digit code, and that was translated to the full DDI. Unfortunately, it didn't work. I have a simple example here, what we can find. Usually I don't recommend using short-digit calling in Teams, especially not to colleagues, because in Teams, you come from a traditional PBX, you call your colleagues with a short-digit number, but in Teams, we don't treat our colleagues as numbers, they are persons with names, so in Teams we call names, but in some examples it could be okay with short-digit calling. So here I enter a short number, 1072. This is normalized to a longer number. I start to see that it's too short, but for the example, we'll continue here and make the call out. And it's forwarded. It's the announcement service that answers that it could not be connected. So something happened here. So the next step here would be then to download the log files, Control-Shift-Alt-1, or collect the log files. You right-click and collect all the sort files. We get all the log files in the download folder, and in the next step we open them with the Visual Studio Code. And here you see we have some different log files. What's the most interesting today is the two in the top. It's the calling. It shows information about all the calls and when they started and so on. And then in the first one we get more details about the calls. So let's open up the file here. So we open up the debug file. And here we'll search for the policy services and normalize. We know it's some kind of normalization that went wrong. We open in the editor. When we open in the editor, we get we search for this normalization, and when opening the editor we get everything filtered out that matches that search. So first here we can see that the call was not mapped to the emergency service. It was not an emergency call. And in the line above, the next step is it got this 1072. It normalized it to another number, the full DID, but here I can see it's actually too short. It should be some more numbers, so it was something that went wrong in the normalization. And here, if we scroll some to the left, we can see the full normalization. We can see which normalization rule it was. It was number 8 of 11. We can see all about regex rule. We can see what it should be translated to. In this case, we could come back to the outsourcing partner, and say, okay, you did the normalization wrong. We didn't need any access to Teams Admin Center to see this. We saw it in the log files, and they could correct it. You could also search for normalization rules in the debug file. And here we can see a list of all the normalization rules that have been loaded by the client. So we get a list of all of them. I tend to use this when I implement a new or do a new change in the normalization rules. Well, you never know how long Teams client will take before it applies the changes. So instead of doing change, wait for a while and then test, I can do the change, download the log files, see if the change has been applied, and then we can start doing the testing. So we can see all the normalization rules in the log files here that's been loaded. And if we scroll down here a bit, we see the normalization rule number 8 that were used in this case. So in this example, we used the regex search. With the regex, we can, when we turn that on, we can do use the star to filter out and find everything that matches this policy service and normalize. And then we did a search for the normalization rules to see them. I have another example of emergency calling. So this was a direct routing customer. They used direct routing and dialed out to, when they dialed out emergency number, it was normalized and add country code. So in this example, it was if they dialed 112, it normalized to +46 for Sweden and then 112. So in the example here, I will, in this example, not dial 112. I dial another emergency number in Sweden. It's 11414. It goes directly to police, but it's an IVR answering first, so we are not getting the police connected to us, or it's not directly to police or emergency center. So here we can see, I will go back. So when I dial this number, I can first see it, Teams will normalize it to +46. And we see that it doesn't show its emergency call. So then we can open up the SPC logs and see it's the same normalization. It's sending this, Teams is sending this normalization with +46 to the session border controller. So what we saw was that we had forgot to add these emergency routing policy in Teams. So by adding this in Teams, we enter first what number we will want to call, and then what should go out from Teams. So in this example, for 112, we dial 112, and it will be normalized to 112. It will not add any +46 for country code. And if we open up the log files after doing this change, we can see this has been added to the client's policy. So we open up the log files, and we search for emergency. We can see all the emergency numbers that have been loaded. So we get a list of all the emergency numbers that have been loaded into the client that it will normalize. Then we go back and do a new call. And now we can see it's identified as an emergency call, and it tries to connect here. But here we get another problem. Sorry, we could not connect you. So there was some other issue that we didn't solve. And if we open up the log files here again and do a search, we search for emergency. You can see here in the log file, it finds the emergency call, and here we can also see that the emergency number has an invalid online PSTN usage. So here we can get the exact issue, what's wrong with the call. So the first case, then it was normalization, and now we are missing the online PSTN usage. So if we go back a couple of steps to this. So on purpose, on the first one we have a normal PSTN usage, but for the other one we don't have that. And that we were able to see in the log files. So after fixing that, we do a new call, and it should be connected without any issues. And we're connected, and I hurry up to leave the call so nobody answers there. And to show what's happened in the log files as well, open up the calling log file here, the debug file for calling. Open it in the coder. And if I now search for the emergency, we will see that it loaded the emergency. First we see all the emergency numbers, and below that we can see the dial string, the dial mask, and which PSTN online usage it should use. And here we can also see like information on what routing policy we are using, so we can see that kind of information. And if you're using connected your user to an address, you can see that information below, what public IP address and so on. So you see that information here as well. And if we open up the debug log file and search for number, we can see the that it's been mapped to an emergency number, so the Teams client notices that this is an emergency call. So we can find a lot of things in the in the log files, but there are also some other tools. So now we got a direct routing user that's been activated with the phone number in Teams, but he can't see a dial pad. And yeah, you might see it, something like this. So we're missing the dial pad here. So instead of looking into log files, we will go to another place. We will first see that, okay, we have assigned a phone number to this user. But with access to Teams Admin Center and the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, we can do some searches there for the user and see what issues he have. At the same time, we can make some money to charity. So a win-win situation here. So we see here it's activated for direct routing. We go to the admin center, go to support. We do a new support request. And in the new support request here, we enter search string that's Debug Teams dial pad missing. And next we will enter the username of the user and we will run some tests. And then Microsoft will run some tests in the background for this user and see what kind of issues it can be with this user. And after a couple of seconds, it should show that this user doesn't have a voice routing policy enabled. From here we can get some more information. We can click on the links here. We can, it will show what we have to do to configure this, so we get all the information. So we do this instead of creating a support ticket with Microsoft. And if you go open up the user in Teams Admin Center, we can clearly see that he doesn't have a voice routing policy. And each time we use this search tool, instead of creating a support ticket, Microsoft will donate some money to charity. So you do some good things for you and for charity at the same time. And if you want to make a lot of money for charity, you can go in and do these searches all over. And, yeah. They have it's not only for voice you can do this. So they have gathered a list on this link. I will share the presentation on the portal later, so you get this link. But on this page you can see all the diagnostic tests that you can run. And all these, this seems like a very simple thing to find out. But all these cases, when you look at this, these are the most common cases Microsoft gets to their support. So it's pretty easy things to solve yourself. But anyway, people start support cases for this. But the title of this session is to look into log files. So now you're saying, couldn't we fix this or look into this with the log files? Of course we can. For the same user, we open up the log files. We download the log files first. Open up the debug log file with Visual Studio Code. And we do a search, and in this case, we search for is PSTN calling aloud, and here we get information that PSTN enabled false, and we can go through this line, and then the Teams client do a couple of tests, like is calling aloud, yes it is it cloud, yes it's a cloud user, is enterprise voice enabled, yes it is, and in the end here we will see is bring your own trunk enabled. That was the name of direct routing before it became direct routing, then it was called bring your own trunk. And the end we can see here that the end result is false. So PSTN calling is not allowed, and that's due to the missing routing policy. Another example of information, this is in Teams Admin Center. So I had a customer, they were going from Cisco to Teams. They were deploying session border controllers around the world. And I noticed that all calls, depending on, for example, in US, they were going to the Teams servers in Europe, for some reason. So we could see in the users report that calls were going the wrong direction. And if we checked this US session border controller, and we can see the location Sweden here. So Teams of some reason thinks it's located in Sweden. Actually, the users didn't complain. The latency, because it's not good, but it's not really bad. Since they were coming from Cisco, they thought everything was really good anyway. So it was easy to change the media, where the media should go. We could do that with a PowerShell command. So we were able to change it to another region with that. But we still had a problem with the signaling that was going in the wrong direction. And then we find out that we checked a lot of different geolocation databases. But we found out that Microsoft was using this MaxMind Geo database. So if you see something similar, you create a case with them. That's the Geo database that Microsoft uses. And then you will see that session border controls will use the correct locations. So if you need some more help with digging into log files, I want to recommend Microsoft Tech Community that's really good, helping out on secondary Microsoft support. But these log files, should you send them to the Tech Community? I actually saw someone that did that. They had some issues, and they attached all their log files to their thread there, or to the topic. Someone asked, can you send the log files, and they published the log files in Tech Community. And I saw some interesting information there. So, for example, you can see if we download the log files and we search for meetup join, that's part of the URL that's connected to all the Teams meetings. So here we find the URL to the meeting. So if you share the log files, everybody that get the log files also get access to your meetings that you're being in. So here I just can click it, open it, and join the meeting. Especially this meeting, as you can see, it was called like finance report. Maybe nothing I want to share with the whole tech community. Especially if it's a reoccurring meeting, then someone else could join it. But most of you, if you probably have, for external users, you have turned on the lobby, so they will not get into the meeting. They will be stuck in the lobby. But a lot of meetings I attend, there are like a lot of people in there. As soon as the admit from the lobby, everybody like allow. They don't look at the name. But if they look at the name, it's we go back to the log file here, and we can see we just disconnect this. We go back to the log file, and instead I search for name, and then we can see the full name of the user. So if you have a secret meeting and someone gets access to these log files, it wouldn't be that hard to create another user with exactly the same name and like trick into the meeting. Another interesting information you can get on some place, you can get the year coordinates of the client, where it's located. And this you can copy and go to some map engine, Google or Bing. You just copy the coordinates and you will probably find the location of the client and some known location there. It's not for all cases you see the geolocation, but in some cases you can see it. So there is some sensitive personal information shared in these log files. So I wouldn't recommend sharing this in a public forum. Share it with someone you trust, like a community friend or a Microsoft support or internal IT or something like that. So the examples I showed here, meetup join will show you all the meetings that the user has been joining. Name, search for the name of a user, and year coordinates. It can show the location. So this was some examples you can find in the log files. I hope you find some of them interesting, and don't be afraid to look into log files. You can find a lot of interesting information there. It's not. I showed the headset about it was it disconnected a call, but you can also see if the user joined the meeting muted, and if they're muted during the meeting, or information like that. So you see a lot of information there. It's probably harder to find exactly the right information than finding any information. So, thank you. And if there are any questions, we have a box thrower here. Really like to.
Thank you. I may have a quite obvious question. How do I know which log file is important for me?
Yeah.
So I just saw you used just 2 different log files.
Yeah, for calling.
What about all the rest? So every time you see the download stuff, it was about 20 files or even more.
Yeah.
How can I identify the right one?
That's hard.
Okay.
Yeah. Now for the calling that I showed, if you have an issue calling, start with the one that ends with _calling, and you will find some basic information there, and then continue with the one without any suffix. So the one on the top. That's. And then the ones below there is one called like experience. It's more about how the view of the desktop client, and yeah. So those 2 is the most interesting for calling and meetings.
Okay, so it's just experience in this case. If you not created a blog article, you may want to create some, and I think you will get a ton of hits.
Yeah, I know. It's on the to-do.
Perfect.
So I wanted to complete this presentation first, and then the blog article.
Thank you. since you search for a lot of specific keywords in the log files, is there any kind of documentation for regarding which word to use to find your information?
Unfortunately, I haven't found any good documentation. So these are search words I found by trial and error.
Oh,
like,
okay.
so unfortunately, Microsoft is not that good on documenting this kind of stuff. I will try to do it in a blog article. I haven't found any good articles yet, but yeah. More questions? I know that you really want to throw to the back.
It's fun to throw, it's fun to catch.
If not, I will stick around here so you can ask questions afterwards without the recording. So, thank you.